The H&R Handi rifle and shotguns. Why would I bother to talk about these in 2026 with the menagerie of rifles and shotguns on the market? Why talk about a humble old single shot budget, decades old platform like this? Well, because apparently they're still popular. Last time I was at Cabela's, I saw an H&R Handi rifle in the case, nothing special, 30-30 for $7.99. And I've seen some in gun stores recently used rifles for what I consider a crazy amount of money for what they are. And I was talking to one of the guys in our group chat for patrons and fans of the podcast, and they said some of the barrels go for that much. So they have quite the dedicated following. They're their own little Handi cult, if you will. So I thought it was worth a talk about these. If you love them, if you're a Handi rifle sommelier, or this is brand new to you, you have no idea because you got into guns in the last 20 years and you just don't really know about these. I thought it would be a cool thing to revisit the H&R Handi rifles and the single-shot shotguns. With that, welcome to the podcast where we talk about guns, gunfighting, tactics, ballistics, the right way with God Almighty at the center, biblical, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. On that, I am blessed to serve you as host, military, law enforcement, private security, contracting. Started hunting when I was a boy. Been blessed to hunt all over this beautiful country. That's going to play into today's topic. I would consider myself a survivalist and a prepper. I don't shy away from that. That'll also play into today's discussion. Blessed be the Lord, my rock, who trains my hands for war and fingers for battle. Okay, let's dig into this topic of the H&R. When I was a young boy, somewhere in that era, trying to figure out whether I was a man or a boy, I had a single-shot 20-gauge H&R, or N.E.F. I'm not exactly sure about the two companies and then when they merged. You will hear H&R, N.E.F. I think they got bought up by the same parent company. And then that major company, which I think was Marlin, changed hands a few times since then. So it's all kind of convoluted. They'll generally be referred to as H&R Handi rifles. But I had one of these in 20 gauge. It was not my first shotgun. It was not my first firearm. My first firearm was a bolt-action Mossberg 410, which I love to hunt with. I got this, and I consider this like a Canon 20 gauge N.E.F. compared to that old bolt-action 410 that worked some of the times. This thing worked. Granted, it was a single shot, but a 20 gauge, especially for hunting waterfowl and stuff, was a big step up from the 410. So when I got this, I hunted with it, and I grew up with it. And a lot of people in my era that were, let's just say not affluent, right, that were scraping together money to get a gun to go hunting with, or they got this for a kid. They didn't know they were going to be into hunting so much, or it was like your first rifle, or you just wanted to play with something. These were that of the era. What is that era? Well, I grew up doing this in the 90s. 1991, I saw cited a few times as to when the H&R Handi rifle came out. So right about when I was growing up in the 90s. The H&R Handi rifle. I don't know what all the different rifles cost, but I remember the N.E.F. shotgun that I got. I remember seeing them at the store for $70-something. Right? They were like one of the guns you get at Walmart. The New England Firearms Company shotguns for like well under $100. The rifles I think cost a bit more, but not a lot more, to give you an idea of what they cost. They were very affordable, and they were simple, fairly safe for new shooters because you had a hammer that you had to cock so you could look at the firearm and tell if you were watching somebody else that maybe wasn't as familiar with firearms, whether the gun was going to fire or not. That's kind of important when you're teaching a new shooter. And they were, first and foremost, they were a very cheap, affordable, simple, easy to use, easy to teach somebody how to use, low barrier to entry into firearms. And because of that, I think these were a lot of times, somebody's first firearm, first rifle, first shotgun. They grew up in the 90s. This, I think, explains the prices that some of these firearms, garner today on the market, because I can't really explain it other than it's kind of like, a He-Man action figure from the 80s. If that's what you grew up playing with, you might pay a bunch of money for one today. For somebody that, has gotten their career started off the ground, now they're 30s, 40s, and they're like, I want that rifle I had when I was a kid, or I want that rifle I remember my uncle had, an N.E.F. handy rifle, and they'll pay what it cost because, let's just say that's fair market value, and I think it was for a 30-30 single shot H&R handy rifle, $800. You can get a brand new Ruger American in 308, 30-06, 223, in a sub MOA bolt gun for less than that. So I think a lot of this is nostalgia. Now, let me take a step back and talk about the platform. And my really only first-hand experience, unless I may have shot one of somebody else's at some point, but was the 20 gauge that I owned. Color case hardened, which I think there were different receivers. But and this is very convoluted, guys. And I'm not the expert. I'm not going to use, some artificial intelligence search engine to do my research because I think that's intellectually flaccid for a man to do. But there were a couple of different receivers. There were different shotgun receivers, and there were different rifle receivers, and there was a rimfire receiver. Some of these interchange barrels and some do not. Do your due diligence. Also, these are not like a Thompson Center, Encore, or Contender, which were kind of like the wealthy man single shot when I was growing up. They had such tight tolerances, you could just buy barrels and swap them. The H&R handy rifle had a swappable barrel. However, right, you were supposed to send the rifle back into the factory and have them fit a barrel because the tolerances were not tight enough that you could just buy aftermarket barrels and put them on. That said, a lot of people do that. A lot of people would just buy a barrel and put it on a receiver that they have, and a lot of those people still have both eyes and all their fingers. I'm not telling you should do that. I'm telling you people do that. And I'm not, the safety police, but you are supposed to get them actually fitted and make sure they would work with the receiver that you had because there are different receivers, different strengths. But in theory, you could have like a receiver, and for very little money, because I told you what the guns cost, you could send the rifle in or the shotgun in and have it refitted. Like you could have, a 12 gauge and a 20 gauge. So, if you were just hunting upland birds, maybe you want to take the 20 gauge barrel, or you're going to hunt squirrel or rabbit, maybe you just want a 410 or a 20 gauge. But if you're going to hunt waterfowl, maybe you want to move up to the 12 gauge. Let's say, you just wanted to tinker around and you didn't have a lot of money. These were like the poor man's tinkering gun of yesteryear, right? So they came in some really cool calibers. So if you just wanted to play with, let's say, a 22 Hornet and you didn't want to spend $1,000 on a custom 22 Hornet, you could get one of these in 22 Hornet and you could load for it and play with it. And, the barrels were fairly affordable. And that was kind of the big appeal of this. Today, those guns are like the Glock and the AR-15, where you can just tinker with them and play with them. If I'm picturing a caricature in my head of the guy that likes to tinker and play around with the AR, it's like the guy that's got like the tactical coffee in his hand, and he's got like the black multicam cargo shorts on, and he's got like the T-shirt that says "Tactical Operator operating tactically in a tactical operator environment" slogan on his shirt, right? In a pair of Oakleys. And the guy that tinkers with this is more, if I'm thinking of a caricature in my head, it's like the guy with a coonskin cap and a mullet and a pair of Crocs standing in his garage at a reloading bench. There's nothing wrong with that. Both those guys, you're welcome here. But that's kind of who I picture as like the guy that wants to tinker and play with stuff, affordably back in the day. This was like their rifle. And it was really good for that. You send the rifle in, you get a different barrel, it was affordable, you want to play with something else. And since I keep talking about the calibers, let me talk about some calibers I know they made them in. Now, again, I'm not going to use AI and be an intellectual midget and have that do all the research. But some of the research that I found, and I'll try and give credit where it's due. Before this, I listened to an episode by Jack Spirico, the Survival Podcast. And his episode was in like 2012 or 2014. I think 2014 was the last one on the H&R Handy rifle. He's one of the guys that got me into podcasting, and I'm blessed to serve on his expert council. He doesn't talk about guns a lot, but when he does, he knows what he's talking about. And I'm blessed to serve him as his expert council member, along with a bunch of other really knowledgeable people on other subjects. So I don't feel bad about that. And I put a link to this episode on my Patreon page, and it's free. I put it on the free tab, so you don't have to sign up or pay me money to find his episode. So you can go back and listen to that. I'll try and give credit where it's due, and he lists some calibers there because he was, back in the day, I don't know if he still is, a H&R Handy rifle aficionado. So with that, let me look on here and see what he has listed. And this is, again, not an exhaustive list here. But if we look at this, we see, and this is going to be 2014, episode 1417, and he lists 22Hornet, 223 Remington, 243 Winchester, 7mm 08, 30-30, 30-06, 35Whelen, 357 Magnum, 44 Magnum, and 4570 Government, also the common shotgun calibers. So those are some of the really cool ones on there. Now, to give credit where it's due again, some other really cool ones that I found would be, let me pull it up here. Union Sportsman's, this article on here, I see some things on here like a thumbhole stock. They have one called the Buffalo Classic. They have one called the Survivor listed on here for the H&R Handy rifle. They have a 17 HMR, 4570, 500 Smith & Wesson Magnum. I think that round is kind of comical in a revolver. It's like a crew-served revolver. It's so big, it's a handgun in name only. But in a rifle, that's pretty cool. That's a pretty cool caliber in a rifle. I wish they made more rifles than 500 Smith & Wesson. However, they list that one on there, and they list the 35Whelen. That's pretty cool. So a lot of really cool calibers. Again, for somebody that doesn't have a lot of money that wants to play with a 35Whelen, especially in the 90s, you could get like a Mauser or something and have it custom made into a 35Whelen, but there weren't a lot of factory options available. If you just wanted to tinker around, let's take that caliber specifically. 30-06 brass has been super plentiful for a long time. All you really have to do is get that and reform it into 35Whelen, get some 35 caliber projectiles. You probably already have the powder and the primers, and you could be off and running for the cost of a barrel and a 35Whelen. And that was really the only thing of the era that would let you do that affordably. Again, you could get like a Thompson Center Encore, but those barrels, just the barrels were a lot more money, not to mention the entire platform. So, that's something to be aware of. And that's why these were so popular. And I think that's why a lot of people that either already have them and just love them, or they had them growing up and they've, got some fancier rifles and this or that, and they've got the money, but they want that gun that they grew up shooting. It makes a lot of sense. Again, I'm going to reiterate, these were not supposed to or designed to be interchangeable unless you got like a combo kit. I remember there was a combo kit from the factory, and it was like 22 something, 243, and one of the shotgun gauges. And that was like kind of like a, shooter starter pack, if you will, back in the day. And those were pretty cool. But unless they came from the factory matched, you were supposed to send them in and have them, fitted to the gun. So unless you know what you're doing or you have one that's already been fitted, they're not supposed to be interchangeable. So just keep that in mind. Also, they're not free-floated, right? This is a single shot where the forearm is connected to the barrel. You could probably tinker with them like many other things and make them accurate, but I would not get one and expect it to be super accurate. If you were, I would suspect that a lower pressure round would be more accurate, like a 22Hornet or something like that, maybe even a 45-70, big caliber but low pressure, because pressure tends to put a lot of torque and stuff on things. So I don't know that for sure. I'm just guessing. Again, some of these have the color case hardened receiver. Some of them were black. Some of them, I believe, came in stainless steel. At least the barrels came in stainless steel. There were different stock designs. There was the wood stock. There was the polymer stocks. Another big advantage to these is you don't have the length of the receiver. So if you picture like a bolt action receiver, whether it's a short action, a 308 or a standard length action, a 30-06, there's, several inches in there, let's say 3.5 inches, that you're not going to have on one of these single shot style rifles because you put the round in the barrel and then you shut the barrel. So you don't, let's say if you were going to shoot a gun with a 22-inch barrel, fairly common for a center fire rifle, that's the length of that from the firing pin. If you were doing that in a standard bolt action, it would be much longer than that because you have the length of the action. That said, these are not particularly light rifles. They are small and handy, hence the name Handi rifle. So if you're doing a lot of brush hunting, a lot of swamp hunting, which I did as a boy, hunting in the swamps and the salt marshes and stuff like that, real thick briar bushes and brambles, they're pretty handy for that, hence the name the Handi rifle. But if you expect them to be like a light mountain rifle, they're not that. They're not particularly light, especially compared to a lot of, bolt action rifles and things. They weren't designed to be ultralight. They were designed to be ultra affordable. And they're handy because they're short. So, don't expect them to be super lightweight. And of course, they are a single shot. I'm not telling you to get one of these for the apocalypse. I think a lot of people, getting back to the survival prepper thing, a lot of people think these are a great choice because they can have let's say one receiver and 5 barrels. But if you got to bug out, that's going to weigh a lot more than a lot of other more practical guns. And people are like, I'm going to scavenge for ammo. I'm going to have my single shot 12 gauge. And I'm going to have all these adapters, right? So I can have, all these different calibers, 38 special and 32, H&R and all these different calibers I can shoot out of my one single shot 12 gauge. Well, that's cool until you're facing 3 people and then you're dead and then they have your gun because you have a single shot, right? So I'm not the biggest fan of them for that. And I don't know how much you're going to be scavenging random ammo in the apocalypse. I don't know. I could be wrong on that one. But I would say get a good firearm with repeatable firepower. But these are really cool. They are handy, as the name suggests. And if you are a tinkerer, you want to take a 357 Magnum and ream it out to, to 357 maximum, which would be fairly easy on these. And assuming that you did your due diligence and were sure and, did your mathematical engineering and figured out it could handle the pressure of that round, that's something you could tinker with. If you just want to tinker around with a bunch of different rounds that, are fairly uncommon. These let you do that back in the day. I don't know if they still make sense today. Let me talk about some guns that do similar things today. There are the Rossi single-shot shotguns. They're fairly affordable. Not American-made, sadly. We don't make stuff in America as much as we used to, it seems. Especially we've outsourced a lot of our firearms. I mean, even Winchester doesn't make their guns in America, and Browning doesn't make their guns, even in Belgium anymore. But we've outsourced a lot of things to cheaper countries. So the Rossi, not American-made. It's also not Turkish-made. There are a bunch of cheap Turkish-made shotguns, which I don't suggest you get. And there are the CVA. And the CVAs, I think, are decent quality. They make a single-shot rifle and a bunch of calibers. Not as many as the H&R, but they make some decent quality single-shot rifles. So if you don't care so much about the nostalgia and you want something similar today, you might look at a single-shot 4570 CVA. Or 35Whelen CVA if you just want a single shot. You just want to play around with a 35Whelen. So you do have some other options today. And of course, if you just love the H&R Handi rifle, they're still around. They're still a thing. So I thought I would do this episode, one for the people that love the H&Rs or the N.E.Fs, or for those that have no idea that they even exist. The company is not in business anymore that I'm aware of. I think H&R makes like ARs now, like retro ARs, but as far as like the Handi rifle, those are not a thing anymore, at least on the used market. Maybe they'll bring those back, but I don't know what they would cost to make new in America now. Anyway, I thought this was an episode that should get done because so many people do still have and love and use these rifles and shotguns. With that, guys, thank you for listening. The buttstock shell carriers or ammo carriers for your tactical tip, these can always be used. Like you can obviously use these with a bolt action or a lever action or whatever, but they make a lot of sense for a slow to reload gun like a single shot like an N.E.F, right? You have the ammo right there on the side, so when you pop the action open, you can just reach over on the stock and throw a new round in and shut the action. So in the era where a lot of us just have detachable box magazine guns, we don't really think about the ammo carrier on the stock. But for something like a shotgun or one of these break-open single-shot rifles, carrying the ammo on the stock right there makes a lot of sense. It can make for a fairly quick reload compared to like trying to dig in your pocket and find a round. So don't forget about those. They're super affordable, just a cheap elastic one. You can get a neoprene one. They're very affordable and a very good way to carry extra ammo on a gun like this. Whatever you do in regards to weapons or life in general, remember that there will be a judgment day. Remember that. Our tactical verse of the day is going to come from the book of Romans. Romans chapter 2. God will repay each one according to his deeds. Or my favorite translation, general go to New King James, who will render to each one according to his deeds. Remember that. There's no getting one over on God. There's no hiding anything from him. Not only does he know everything that you do, he knows all your thoughts and intents of the heart. That also is biblical. With that, guys, thank you for listening and have a blessed day.